Omtrent 4 jaar gelede het ek 2016 onderhoud gehad met Ian Goldin oor sy boek Age of Discovery en ek het hom geskryf saam met Chris Kutarna en ek het die eerste naweek van ons Grendelstatus het ek 'n paar goed onthou het na my toe teruggekom en ek het die boek gaan soek en ek het hom weer gelees en was verbaas wat ek daarin gesien het. So ons het gedink om weer met Ian te gesels en he's in Oxford now. Ian Goldin, a big welcome back to the Grot Ontbyt.
I'm sorry I can't be with you in Linwood.
Yeah, can you believe it? And you know Pretoria well. When we spoke to you 4 years
I grew
ago,
up there.
realized, yeah, you're a Pretoria boykie, but then you're an absolute international. I can call you an intellectual at this stage. And when we spoke about the book, I would never have thought speaking to you in these circumstances. But before we get there, just tell us the situation in England at the moment. I know there was a big concern with Boris Johnson, but even a lot of people losing their lives. It's I don't know about your lockdown, but just give us a bit of info of the situation there.
The coronavirus is devastating. It's spread very, very fast. And we are now approaching 1,000 deaths a day. So this is very serious. We are really 2 or 3 weeks behind Italy, France, and Spain, who are experiencing similar things. We don't have as much as the US, but of course the US population is 5 times, 6 times bigger than the UK. We're 60 million people here, about the same as South Africa. So it's spreading. We locked down. I'm locked down in my house in Oxford. There's very little travel, not exactly the same lockdown as in South Africa, but similar. And we think we're reaching the peak in deaths. Maybe they're talking about this weekend being the peak, and then it should start coming down because we're not yet seeing the impact of the lockdown. It lags 2 or 3 weeks behind in terms of deaths. And then we see what happens. Of course, like in South Africa, the economy is frozen. The focus is all on stopping people going to hospitals, particularly the elderly, the vulnerable. And it's a very, very bad time. The question is, like in South Africa, how do you exit this? But South Africa has been brilliant. The president, Cyril Ramaphosa, has caught this very quickly, and his leadership is really something which I think the whole world can learn from.
And then getting back to the book, I want to, at page 173, you said, we all need to develop a heightened concern for a particular kind of risk. It's not the direct danger that confronts us daily, things like getting hit by a car or being robbed, and me myself being through an armed robbery. I mean, that's the reality in South Africa.
Yeah.
But you said we're all well aware of such specific hazards. We've got security. It's the risk we don't see. We're going to get to some other things you said in the book, but it was kind of, there was a couple of people in the world, if we go back to the speech that the TED Talk Bill Gates did in 2015, but this was even earlier, guys knew something was coming. Do you think there was people waiting for it a bit?
Yes, absolutely. In Age of Discovery, but also in my book I did in 2014 called The Butterfly Defect, I focus on this risk of globalization. I've said many times in those books and elsewhere that a global pandemic is inevitable, that it will lead to the next financial crisis, and that's what we've seen. But it wasn't only me. People that work on pandemics know that this is inevitable. Unfortunately, the butterfly defect of globalization, which is basically means that when we connect, not only good things connect, we become very interdependent and very bad things connect. So our great airport hubs are not only super spreaders of good things, like we can have travel, we can have tourism, we can have business through the airports, but they also spread bad things like pandemics, which is why South Africa and many countries, including the UK, are now closing them down. Computer hubs are not only spreaders of internet, allow us to communicate like we're communicating now digitally, but they spread viruses around the world, computer viruses. Our financial centers not only spread the possibilities of finance around the world, investment and other flows, but they also spread financial crises. And we need to understand this if we want to have globalization. We have to manage the bad aspects as well as harvest the goods. And that was a complete failure by the international community to manage the bad things. So a pandemic was inevitable. That it would lead to an economic crisis was inevitable. The only question was where would it come from and when, and it could come from anywhere. This time China, but let's not blame the Chinese. This could have come from any country, including South Africa, and it would have spread globally.
For me, this was the most amazing thing to discover again in the book on page 164.
You've been reading carefully, thank you.
In 2005, scientists resurrected the virus responsible for the 1918 Spanish flu. And the question was, how long will it take before someone designs an artificial virus that's even deadlier? And then it happened in 2012, where people, and they were detailing mutations of the lethal H5N1 bird flu. But the amazing thing that I only realized now is that there was for months a debate to publish these findings.
Yes.
And at the end of the day, the Science magazine did publish it. So I'm not into conspiracy theories, but that was a very dangerous thing. So just, do you think...
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, so I'm not into conspiracy theories, but do you think it was maybe someone making a mistake, or was it just nature nailing us?
No, this is nature. This is inevitable. This is a bat flu. It came from a bat, we think. But the closer contact between the wild animals, particularly bats, other wild animals and humans, and that's being increased by the pressures of ecological collapse, the forests being collapsed, but also people eat wild animals across Africa, of course, but in China as well. And this is the spread that's happening now. I don't believe any of the conspiracy theories. The pandemic experts have known for a very long time, and there were many others like avian influenza, like others, Ebola as well, that come from wild animals. So you don't need a conspiracy theory for pandemics. Pandemics come from the contacts between humans and animals. But what I talk about in Age of Discovery, which you're pointing to, is in the future, we increasingly will see human-made pandemics, because now you can cook up in a laboratory the sequence, the genetic sequence of a previous pandemic, like the Spanish flu or like smallpox or something like that. But you can also create new ones we don't even know about, and you could put it on a crop sprayer, or you could put it on a drone, fly it into our stadiums or down our streets, and you could create a global pandemic very, very quickly. And this is the future, which is why the risk of pandemics is going to be moving increasingly from the poor countries, which are now the sources, places, slums, poor sanitary conditions, wild meat markets near airports. It happened in Wuhan, but it could happen in 1,000 other cities around the world, many in Africa too. It's moving from that to a new type of threat, which is laboratories. And these are becoming cheaper and cheaper because the equipment is becoming more and more available. And that is a big threat. So we need to stop pandemics of all types, and we particularly need to stop this building new threat as well, which is likely to come from rich countries.
Last question, Ian, because in this book also you spoke about the financial crisis, 2008. It's not just about the virus and pandemics. How do you see the future? How do you see the future after this?
Of pandemics or in general?
In general. Financially, just this virus, recovering, maybe a time frame, or what do you think? Are we in trouble?
Okay. We're in trouble, but I'm optimistic. I'm optimistic that in the countries where there's been strong leadership, so China, South Korea, Hong Kong, only 5 deaths in Hong Kong, which is quite amazing. Singapore and South Africa, very strong leadership, that we will see an ability to contain the pandemic, and with that, an ability to regenerate economic activity. The other amazing thing that's happened in South Africa is the Solidarity Fund with businesses, wealthy individuals contributing to keep people from starvation. Because the big danger, particularly in Africa, and not least South Africa, is that more people die of starvation or malnutrition than die of the pandemic. That is a big risk. So if you freeze the economy for too long, you have another problem. And in Europe, in the US, we're going to see a lot more death, and then we're going to see a recovery. I think it'll be more like a W-shaped recovery because we can't quite get this pandemic stopped until we have a vaccine. And that's going to take at least a year to roll out. So we'll see a gradual re-entry of people that have either had the virus or immune into the economy. Young people are not very vulnerable to the virus compared to old people and vulnerable people that have underlying diseases. So we'll see a gradual recovery. But this is devastating. It's going to take a big national effort, and it's going to take a big global effort. I think we need, like after the Second World War, and I think about this like the war, a war situation, we're going to need the recreation of a whole new institutional structure. Then it was the United Nations, the Bretton Woods Institution, the Marshall Plan. We need a global plan to ensure that development recovers, that as few people as possible not only die of the medical emergency, but the economic emergency. And we need to ensure that we get global economic activity getting going again. Otherwise, there's no job prospects. Otherwise, it's a very bleak future. I think it can be done, but it's going to require big action. In the past, the US led this action. Now the US is missing. So that's going to require a big focus of others, the Europeans, the Chinese, South Africa, and other players to get going.
Ian, thank you so much. I wish you safety and good health.
And
just
safe
send
to
me,
you and all your listeners as well.
no, it's fantastic. Just send me some pounds because it's really looking good against the rand. Thanks, Ian.
Thanks for inviting me to be on your show.
Okay, bye.
Goeiemiddag.
Ian Goldin, al die pad van Oxford en glo my, 'n pond gaan vir ons almal nou gehelp het.